Thank you so much. Good morning. It's a total pleasure to be here standing in front of all of you. And actually, I didn't know I was going to be the opening speaker, but here we are. I wanted to start off with a little experiment, and I'd like you guys to participate a little bit. For those of you that have ever thought about starting a business, or have you ever attempted to start a startup in the past, please raise your hand and keep your hands up. Very good. If you wondered what it is like and you wish that you could start a startup, please raise your hand as well and keep your hands up. And if you were curious and ever dream of running a startup, and you search online and try to learn more about what startups are, also raise your hand and keep your hands up. Okay, so keep your hands up and assume that you are running a startup right now, okay? And 12 months down the road, this happens. Would you quit your startup? What are the following reasons that will cause you to quit your startup? You get no investors, 12 months. If you will quit, please lower your hand. No customers. If you quit after 12 months of getting no customer, nobody pays for your services, nobody buys your product, please lower your hand. Your company runs out of money. That's getting really real. That is an everyday startup concern, right? So lower your hand if that will cause you to quit. Rejections. You get rejections over and over again. These are the everyday challenges that startups would be facing. So raise your hands, those that are still up, and look around. Startups are not easy. Thank you very much. You may lower your hand. So what are startups? Startups are small organizations that are looking to solve some really big world problems using very limited amount of resources. And there's all of that messiness that happens before the company gets formed. That messiness, today we call it the startup building stage or the venture building stage. That is the scariest part of the process of building a startup, because it's the period in which most failures and mistakes tend to happen, because there's a lot of learning and discovery that happens throughout this process. And let me tell you why. I was a banker for over 10 years, working for some of the largest private banks across Southeast Asia. And in reality, I never really saw myself spending the rest of my life working for large corporations. So in 2016, I decided to do a very irrational thing, which is to resign from my position as a VP of a private bank. And at that point in time, everybody thought I was crazy. In fact, those close to me thought I was going through this eat, pray, love journey. And a lot of people were very concerned. My colleagues said, well, you know, so many bankers have left the banking industry and then they tried and they failed and they came back. My friend said, well, you know, what do you know about startups? It's so hard and so risky. When I sat my parents down, my parents were like, well, you don't know anything about business. You've never built a business before. And at that point, I just looked at them and I was, well, I'm not getting any younger. And if there's one thing that I can, is that I can learn. And I can start right now. So on 2016, I packed my bags and I took a picture of it to remind myself of what I was leaving behind. And I traveled to different parts of the world in search of my own startup journey. I went to all of these different startup ecosystems: Silicon Valley, Berlin, New York, Amsterdam. And you know, it wasn't easy because I was networking every day. If I could map it out, it would look a little bit like this. I was going around, meeting all these different people, so many amazing ideas, and we're always talking about new possibilities. But there was one clear problem: lack of direction. I didn't know what I was doing. I was traveling around trying to discover what it is like to be an entrepreneur and what it is like to build a startup. And through this process, I also discovered the same problem was with many other aspiring founders. So at this point, reality began to sink in. That journey that I set off for myself to discover what entrepreneurship and startup is within 12 months is most likely going to last more than 3 or 4 times longer. And so the scary part is that I came from Singapore, a country where there's so much resources, and I was given so many opportunities. But there are 99% of aspiring entrepreneurs out there in different parts of the world that don't get that type of resources, and they don't get any guidance. And they're forced by their circumstances and the environment to have to start a business. So the question that I've always had in mind is, why isn't there a system or a framework to train people to build better businesses, more resilient businesses for the first time? And in actual fact, there is. For many years, there are many startup experts that's been around in the ecosystem, and they've been putting together frameworks and learnings in order to help first-time founders. And the purpose of many of these frameworks and learnings is actually to fast-track the entrepreneurial journey for first-time founders so that they will not be making so many mistakes. In fact, it's to cut down over 70% of those common failures experienced by first-time founders. However, there's a very high chance that you haven't heard about those learnings or frameworks. Let me tell you why that is. As you know, there's all of that messiness, and a first-time founder or an early-stage startup would typically apply to join a program. And that program traditionally has been done within accelerators and incubators. And so those frameworks, when you join into those organizations, they will typically introduce you to customers, give you a lot of guidance, and possibly even give you a little bit of investment at the beginning to get your business started. But that is not my story. Because in my earlier few months, I got rejected by over 20 other programs. And later on, I found out the reason why. Because these are very exclusive programs. First of all, they're very expensive to run, so they can't take in everybody. Secondly, they are concentrated in certain core cities around the world. And so physical and time zone is already a problem to access those, especially if you're not within the same region. And then they only accept the top 1% of aspiring entrepreneurs who they think are gonna become successful entrepreneurs, which clearly I wasn't it. And it was hard not getting those kind of resources. In other words, these programs that are meant to be helping 99% of aspiring entrepreneurs from making mistakes out of that, they're completely excluded. And that is typically a problem because there is 60 million new entrepreneurs coming into the ecosystem every year, according to statistics. And that is to say that 99% of aspiring entrepreneurs from all of these different parts of the world are not going to get support or guidance, and most likely will be figuring things out by themselves. And so that means, according to that statistics, that less than 2 of you, if you apply and you wanted to be an entrepreneur, will get accepted into those programs. So good luck for the rest of you. And that is That is not easy for somebody who's just starting and figuring things out. As an entrepreneur, today, I consider myself as self-made and have to learn everything by myself. But also, not only have I learned those frameworks, I've also conquered it. I'm recognized by quite a number of institutions as a thought leader in the start building space. And my dream is to deprivilege the access and learnings to entrepreneurship. I spent the last 5 years on the ground working with leading Singaporean universities, learning about the complexity of what it is to take people, individuals, focusing on people first, and how to guide them through the process and the complexity that it takes to turning them into entrepreneurs. Typically, if you don't get those type of guidance, it would take about 1.5 years to figure things out. We try to decomplex the entire system and turn it into a 3-month program. Starting from the ideation stage, looking at the problem statement, the business model, building a minimum viable product, establishing the business model, and eventually delivering long-term value for the customer. Then we overlay the entire thing with a technology system so that we are able to document and track every step of the process of the entire journey so that we can convert that into performance data. Now, as an entrepreneur who builds entrepreneurs, I absolutely love startups. I love the drama, I love the people, I love the failures, and I love the innovation. And above all, I love everything and every step that it takes to get there. To me, every aspiring founder and every startup journey tells a story of resilience, a story of perseverance. If you raised your hand earlier when I asked if you wish to be an entrepreneur, and your dream is to build a startup, you are already part of the next generation of startup founders. But I want you to know that if you want, you can choose to have a clear structure and a fast-track method to walk through your first stages of building your first dream startup. Thank you very much.